Okay, now we're running. Okay, so we'll read this passage. After this, there was a feast of the Jews, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. Now there is in Jerusalem by the sheep gate a pool in Aramaic called Bethesda. I mentioned to you yesterday that this is interesting that John writes that there is a pool. It was still there, right? There are some people, sometimes scholars say that the Gospels, the four Gospels, were written hundreds of years after Jesus was alive. Anyone who tells you that has an agenda that requires the Gospels and the New Testament books to be older than they actually are. Every single New Testament book was written in the first century. This one was written a little later, but it was written in the first century, in the late 80s or early 90s. So there is in Jerusalem by the sheep gate a pool in Aramaic called Bethesda, which has 5 roofed colonnades. In these lay a multitude of invalids, blind, lame, and paralyzed. One man was there who had been an invalid for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and knew that he had already been there a long time, he said to him, "Do you want to be healed?" The sick man answered him, "Sir, I have no one to put me in the pool, and when the water is stirred up, and while I am going, another steps down before me." Jesus said to him, "Get up, take your bed, and walk." And at once the man was healed, and he took up his bed and walked. Now that day was the Sabbath, so the Jews said to the man who had been healed, "It is the Sabbath, and it is not lawful for you to take up your bed." But he answered them, "The man who healed me, that man said to me, 'Take up your bed and walk.'" They asked him, "Who is the man who said to you, 'Take up your bed and walk'?" Now the man who had been healed did not know who it was, for Jesus had withdrawn as there was a crowd in the place. Afterward, Jesus found him in the temple and said to him, "See, you are well. Sin no more, that nothing worse may happen to you." That's kind of cryptic. The man went away and told the Jews that it was Jesus who had healed him. And this was why the Jews were persecuting Jesus, because he was doing these things on the Sabbath. But Jesus answered them, "My Father is working until now, and I am working." This was why the Jews were seeking all the more to kill Jesus, because not only was he breaking the Sabbath, but he was even calling God his own Father, making himself equal with God. So, yeah. So he has an interesting response to Jesus. He doesn't say yes. He has an excuse for why he can't get to the pool. I think it's a valid excuse. But if I were in his place, and I imagine if you were in his place, you'd say, yes, please, heal me. And we're not gonna go through the review, but we are gonna talk first about this idea of after this. We see this phrase "after this" several times in John, and each time an amount of time has elapsed. Now, we don't know exactly how long. The curriculum says this is Passover, and so it's been a year. It was a gap of a year, but it doesn't say it's Passover. It says a feast of the Jews was at hand. There are 6, 7, 8 different feasts of the Jews. So it might have been a whole year, but it might have been less than that. We just don't know. It might have been longer than that. We just don't know. So and we certainly don't know that it's Passover. So we're not going to fill in those gaps, but we are going to fill in the gaps of what happened with Jesus, because we can do that from Matthew, Mark, and Luke. So he went from Cana to Nazareth, and then he went up to Capernaum, where he healed Peter's mother-in-law. And then at some point he headed toward Jerusalem. It's possible that he wrote, so that gold one is him walking to Jerusalem. It's possible that he would have sailed north to south. on the Sea of Galilee and then walked the rest of the way. We just don't know. But we do know that he is in Jerusalem because this story takes place in Jerusalem. And we talked about the sheep gate. We're not entirely sure which of those two gates is the sheep gate, but it's one that is near the where the pool was, where the pool of Bethesda was. Remember that Bethesda, and that we're at called Bethesda, means house of mercy. And that's something that you want to remember, House of Mercy. Interestingly, the most famous naval hospital in the entire world is in Washington, D.C., and its name is Bethesda. And I love that their hospital means House of Mercy. I know that because my next youngest sister was born there, and she was twice very ill. And one of those times, they were afraid she might die. And she was at Bethesda each of those times. Actually, two of those times they thought she might die because when she was born, they said she will die. So, but God had other plans. And I love that it's the house of mercy. That hospital's the house of mercy. And so then I showed you these remains of the pool of Bethesda. Some of what you see, it has been built over the pool. Some of what you see is the pool, and I think these bricks are probably a little bit later than that, but they excavated in 1888 this reservoir, and they knew what they had found because on the wall there was an ancient etching of an angel and water, and the angel is stirring up the water. And so that was the belief in Jesus' day. And so somebody commemorated it by etching that into the wall. And then this is a nearby spring. I don't know if this is the Gihon spring, but it may be the spring that supplied the water for the pool of Bethesda. And then we got to talk about what does this tell us about Jesus, because John tells us that he tells each of his stories so that we might believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God. And so then how do we see Jesus as God in this particular story? And this story reveals grace and mercy, the grace and mercy of God. Now, grace and mercy are related terms. They're like cousins, but they're not identical terms. Does anybody know the difference from grace, what grace means, and what mercy means? We know the difference? What is grace? Grace is unmerited favor. You cannot earn it. If you can earn it, it's not grace. Grace is God giving us something we don't deserve. Grace is God giving us something that we do not deserve, a good thing that we don't deserve. We don't deserve salvation, but God gives us that. It's His unmerited favor. Nothing we can do to earn it. Mercy is similar, but mercy is God not giving us what we do deserve, something bad that we do deserve. We are all rotten sinners, dirty, rotten sinners, deserving hell. But because of what Christ has done, and because of God's love for us, He doesn't give us what we deserve. He gives us mercy and allows us to live with Him in heaven. Grace and mercy are similar, but we see both of these, right? He gives the man something he doesn't deserve, healing, right? And He doesn't give the man what he probably did deserve, for not thanking him, not coming back and saying, even asking his name. But we see his grace and mercy, and grace and mercy are two attributes of God. And so we see his deity not just in his grace and mercy, but in his power to heal this man, and to know already who he is. He's omniscient. He knows everything about the man. So like every other story in John records this story to tell us who Jesus is. These were written that you might believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you might have life in his name. And so he's telling us this story so that we might believe in Christ and therefore have life. So we see his deity because he heals the man, which is something only God can do. Now, doctors can heal, but doctors can't say to a quadriplegic, pick up your mat and walk. They can try to do surgeries or cutting edge scientific new things that science and medicine have found out, but they can't just heal someone. And Jesus could do that, and only God can do that. And so we see his deity in this story because he's doing something that only God can do. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the condition of the man. They use several very old-timey words. I'm not quite sure why they do that, but they do. So I'll explain them to you as we go. So the pool of Bethesda in this case, in this story, is symbolizing the grace of God. Jesus is giving this man grace. And we're going to connect the condition of the man to people who don't know Jesus. And this is true. Much of this is true for all of us, even that do know Jesus. So the word impotent just means powerless or weak. The man had little or no use of his hands and his legs. There was no way he could get into the pool. He needed help. He was incapable of getting himself to the pool. And so just like that, we are incapable of saving ourselves. We are incapable of getting to heaven on our own merit. And everybody wants to. Everybody wants to get to heaven on their own merit. They want to earn it. They don't want a free gift. They don't want the free gift because the free gift comes with a relationship with Jesus, and they don't want that. And most people, if you ask them, how do you get to heaven, especially most Americans, would say, well, your good has to outdo your bad. All you got to do is 51%, 49%, you're good. But nowhere in the Bible is that. Just by grace you are saved through faith, and that's not of yourselves. It is the gift of God, not the result of works, so that no one can boast. But they want to earn it because they don't want this. We're like perpetual 3-year-olds. I don't know if you've ever babysat a 3-year-old or been around a 3-year-old, but they think they can do everything. They think there's nothing that they cannot do. And I remember my oldest, who's just a little bit stubborn, and he wanted to tie his shoes. So I let him try. And he got frustrated because he couldn't do it. But he desperately wanted to be able to. But he couldn't. And that's us. We want to be able to make our own way to God. And we can't. We are incapable of it. We are not perfect, and we cannot be perfect. So we are powerless to do anything to save ourselves. And so we have to come to Christ in faith that he will save us. And then secondly, he was blind, blind to the truth, blind to who Jesus was. And I don't mean like blind physically, blind spiritually. And so many people are. Some people aren't blind. They realize who Jesus was, and this is where I was for years. I knew who Jesus was. I just didn't want to submit. And I was blind to so many truths, and so many, just even blind to my own condition and how unhappy I was. Now, this next word is very old-timey. Like right now, you're thinking, halt? What's that talking about? But that's not what it means. It means lame or crippled, unable to walk, unable to take care of yourself. And so this kind of talks about that that's us, that we can't make our way to God. God has made the way for us to come to him. We can't make our own way. We're not able to do that. And then the next one is waiting. So, oh, no, it's not. It's withered. Sorry. As I told you, the man was, his hands and legs were paralyzed. So there was nothing he could do there's nothing he could do to save himself, and there's nothing we can do to save ourselves. There's this term called works righteousness, and this is what most people believe. If I do enough good things, if I work and do things that God likes, I can be righteous enough. And it's a lie. All over the Bible, it says that you cannot come to God through works. That was the whole purpose of the law. The purpose of the law was to convince us that we can't keep the law. It doesn't work. Salvation has always been by grace alone, through faith alone, in Christ alone. And you might be thinking, what? In the Old Testament, salvation was by grace alone, through faith alone, in Christ alone? Yes. They trusted in Christ, a coming salvation, a coming Messiah. They trusted Christ before he came, that he would come. They believed that he would come. The Jews believed that. They believe that they're still waiting for the Messiah. And then those of us who are believers, we look back on the fact and know that Jesus is the Messiah, and we have faith in the Messiah who has come. So salvation has always been by God's grace alone, through faith alone, and even the faith is something that God gives us through Christ alone. And then waiting. So I was talking about that. The Jews were waiting for their Messiah. They still are waiting for their Messiah. Many years ago, I taught world religions at Millard North to juniors and seniors. And it was a semester-long class. And every semester, I would bring in a rabbi named Rabbi Brooks. He died some years ago. He's a really nice, kind, older gentleman. Probably my age now, I don't know. But anyway, he came in to talk to my class. And one of my students, in a Q&A time, one of my students said, "How do you know Messiah hasn't come?" And I had this small window at the back of my class, and he said, "Look out that window." And he said, "Is everything perfect out there?" And, the kids all said, "No." He said, "Messiah hasn't come." Because when Messiah comes, he'll make everything perfect. And it's not perfect out there. So Messiah hasn't come. What Rabbi Brooks didn't understand is that, yes, Messiah, and the Bible talks about this, the Old Testament talks about this, Messiah will make everything right. Someday. The first time Jesus came, he didn't come to make everything right. He came to make us right. He came to die so that people, and to rise again, so that people could live in relationship with God. when he comes again, he'll make everything right. So Rabbi Brooks couldn't conceive of a dying Messiah. The Jews couldn't conceive of a dying Messiah. They only saw Messiah as a conquering Messiah, and they were waiting. In Isaiah 1:8, it gives a description of human beings, and here's what it says about human beings: that we are powerless, blind, crippled, withered, waiting without help and hope. And that is you, and that is me, without Christ. I'm going to read that again. We're powerless, blind, crippled, withered, waiting without help and hope. And apart from Christ, that's who we would be. And he did not recognize Jesus. He couldn't tell them what his name was. And he didn't even say thank you, as far as we know. He just got up and walked away. I don't understand how he could do that, but I'm sure he was grateful. But he didn't know who Jesus was, and that is so true for so many. Jesus is almost universally known, especially in the Western world, but even all over the world, and largely rejected. Everybody knows about Jesus, especially this time of year, right? But he's largely rejected. Very few actually know him. They know of him. That's different, right? You can know of some famous person, but you don't know that person, that famous person. And so it's a different thing altogether. And at this time of year, pretty much everyone that's not Jewish is talking about the birth of Christ. They trot out baby Jesus and the story of Christmas at this time of year, but they don't even know their need for a Messiah. He is a light shining in the darkness, and the world fails to recognize him. They don't know who he is, and so they need help. And it's up to people who do know Jesus to help those people who don't know Jesus. Romans 10, I hope I put this on here, I didn't. Shoot. It's Romans 10, 14 and 15 says, how can I borrow your Bible? Thank you. Ooh, small. So Romans 10, 14 and 15 say this. How then will they call on him in whom they have not believed? And how are they to go? How are they to believe in him of whom they have never heard? And how will they hear without someone telling them? If nobody tells them about Jesus, they'll never know. That's one of the reasons that I am so very proud of students, Cornerstone students, who are now missionaries. Some in the United States, some in far places, telling people about Jesus, telling people who don't know Jesus about him. And that's all they need. Jesus is the help that they need. And Jesus is all that they need. And it's all that he is all that we need as well. And then the persecution. So rather than being praised for this great miracle, you would think that the Jewish leadership would be thrilled that this man was healed. No, they were angry that the man was healed because it happened on the Sabbath. And so they believed that Christ violated the Sabbath. He can't violate the Sabbath. He created the Sabbath, and they were making the Sabbath something that it wasn't supposed to do. And so Jesus sinned in their mind by telling the man to get up and walk, take his mat and walk, and that the man was sinning by doing. Their hearts were so hard. And Jesus can't break the Sabbath. He is God. But even so, they were just, all they saw was Jesus telling this man to sin. And it just made them want to get him even more. Here's what I find interesting about this. The man didn't even ask Jesus his name. He doesn't say, "Who are you?" Right? Nor does it tell us that he was grateful. He also pushes the blame on Jesus. Well, yeah, well, I just did what that guy told me to. He told me to get up and take my mat, and I did. The Jewish leaders were more interested in getting Jesus than the healing of a man who was an invalid. They would rather the man stay an invalid than be healed on the Sabbath. That's messed up. But again, we're all messed up. And we all need Jesus. So that's the end of that. We're going to go over these quizzes quickly. I don't know how much time we have left. 10 minutes? 2 minutes? Okay, well, we might have to finish this on